Hi, everyone. Today, I want to talk about the COVID Symptom Study app, and especially how at Zoe we went from having very little experience of React Native to shipping an app used by more than 1 million people in about 6 days. So this talk is really a case study. We're not expert in React Native, but we want to share with you our journey, what we learned, what worked well, and why we think that ultimately that was a good decision for us to build that app with React Native. So who am I? My name is Julian. I'm VP of Engineering at Zoe. And my co-speaker today will be Mike Davis. Mike will join us for the Q&A, but I will do the talk myself. And Mike is a software engineer. That's one of the main person behind our app. So Zoe, before working on the COVID symptom study app, we are, after all, a nutritional science company. And basically, we're on a mission to try to help people to hit with confidence. And the chart that you can see here is very interesting because for the last 2 years, we've basically done a lot of nutritional study. And one of the things we found out is that all of us respond very, very differently to food. So in that case, we're measuring the blood sugar response, which is the level of sugar you have in your blood after eating a meal. And you can see there is almost like a eightfold difference between the people at the bottom and the people at the very top. And so that's the core of what Zoe has been building for the last couple of years. So fundamentally, we believe that food is the most important medicine we take. And we're building a product around that that should be available to people later in the year. And we also basically the World Ages Nutritional Science program about measuring response to food. And we've been working with a lot of people, and that is actually quite relevant for the work we did very recently with the COVID Symptom Study app. So I've been working with people from KCL, Harvard, Stanford, Massachusetts General Hospitals, and Twins UK. So that brings me to the COVID symptom study app. So for those of you that have never heard of it, it's an app that was released about 2 months ago, primarily in the UK, then the US, and then Sweden. And the principles are very, very simple. We ask you to report your symptoms on a daily basis, whether you're feeling well or unwell. And if you're feeling unwell, we ask you quite a lot of questions about what kind of symptoms you have. Are you coughing? Do you have fever? Do you have a hoarse voice? Have you lost the sense of smell? And basically that information is collected, and we've got a lot of people are participating in this science project, basically. So this information is collected and then sent for analysis, both by teams internal to Zoe, but also teams at KCL, MGH, and other university. And that information is also now disseminated to the government, to the authorities, to the NHS. And that has been extremely useful for understanding better the COVID symptoms. And we made some very interesting discoveries about what are the symptoms that predict whether you have COVID or not, but also just understanding the spread of the virus. This project basically all started, as I said, about 2 months ago. And Tim Spector, which is also one of the founders of Zoe, is a professor of genetic epidemiology at King's College and working for something called Twins UK. And Twins UK is actually the biggest database of twins in the UK. Twins are quite interesting because basically they allow you to analyze genetic factors. So you can compare how people, how twins react to different things. And in our case, we're working with him on the nutrition side of things. So about 2 months ago, he basically reached out to us, and since Twins UK was going to be shut down for the lockdown, they started to ask us, could you build an app for us for understanding a bit better how COVID-19 works, and we could use the Twins registry as a way to learn something very, very specific about COVID that other people could not do. So we said, yeah, sure, we would really love to help. We're like everybody else in the same boat with COVID. So if there is something we can do, let's try to do that. Great. And then team asked us, could I have this app, literally tomorrow evening? Which say, okay, let's give it a try. So obviously, generally, you would take weeks or months to build an app like that. But with COVID-19, we don't have that time. So we really needed to build something extremely quickly. And that's basically how this project started. And this project that started initially with just building an app for the 15,000 people that are part of the Twin registry quickly became, well, actually, this app could work for everybody. So we should release it to the general public. And, if there is an uptake, great. If there is not, then, that's not too bad. We've tried. So we basically had assembled a team at that point, which was, kind of a hackathon style. We had 2 React Native engineers working on the front end, or kind of, because one of those was myself, and I'm actually I've not been writing a lot of code for the last few years, and certainly have not been writing any mobile app. 2 backend engineers, both working on the actual code for the backend, but infrastructure to run it. 1 product designer is coming up with all the design for the screen and thinking about the flow. And our CEO, Jonathan Wolf, was also very involved, both in the flow, but also covering all the legal aspects, which are very complicated for a product like that. So we assembled that team on the 19th of March, which was basically when we've discussed this idea with team and KCL. And we started at lunchtime. And as I said, the goal was to have an app working literally 36 hours later. One of the reasons we wanted to go fast is, as I said, because COVID-19 cannot wait, but also because we were anticipating that getting it through the store review process would be a bit difficult. So in about 36 hours, we actually had the first app. I think we've pushed it towards midnight on the Friday night. And we, went through the store submission process, and quickly we find out that, Google and Apple were also in a bad situation with COVID-19. And therefore, the time they needed to review was upwards of 1 week. So that didn't work for us. So we actually spent a lot of time during the weekend, not only, adding features, but also, reaching out to our network and trying to get through the approval process. Especially everything COVID-19 related is quite controlled on those platforms with, good reasons. So, we had to do quite a lot of paperwork with KCL to, prove to them that this project was actually, a real research project with ethic approval, which is needed for any kind of service research. And basically, on the Monday, we finally got our approval and we're ready to launch the next day. So next day, we've launched at about 9 a.m., mostly by team reaching out to his network and tweeting. And the thing just ballooned during the day, and by the end of the day, we had about 200,000 people using the app. The next day, at about 8 a.m. in the morning, our backend kind of blew up under load because there was just too many people trying to sign up. The press in general caught up with the ID, and by the end of the day, we had about 1 million users of the app. A few days later, we launched in the US. A lot smaller scale, but still quite a lot of work to do and still very valuable. Then we released like a lot of additional features to the app. Some of those were kind of UX improvements. A lot of those were adding new questions because our understanding is evolving constantly. So basically every week we had a set of new questions, whether they're about your symptoms or medical histories. And then more recently, we launched in Sweden. Sweden is quite an interesting country because they didn't have any lockdown. So comparing the stats between the UK and Sweden might be very interesting. And then in parallel to that, there was obviously a lot of research done by a great team at both KCL and Zoe and other places. And that culminated very recently to a research paper published in Nature Medicine, which is one of the best science journals out there. So there's been a very exciting journey, and the team at Zoe and KCL have been like extremely busy, working around the clock to not only support the app, launch new feature, but also kind of promote it and do the research around it. But yeah, to go back to my initial point, something that is really, really unique to this app, I don't think it was achieved that many times, that we literally went from an idea to an app used by 1 million users in less than a week. So a very exciting journey, not without roller coaster of emotions. So today we have about 3.5 million users at the time of recording, and more than 1 million users are reporting their symptoms daily. We're publishing daily map of the virus every day on our website, so you can know how the UK is doing. We're doing similar things in the US and Sweden, but that's just not publishing them daily. As I mentioned, we've got like quite a few research papers that have got published. Some of the main discovery that were made is that cough and fever are actually just one of symptoms that could tell you you've got COVID. Actually, I think there's about 6 different groups of symptoms. And one of the most interesting one is actually anosmia, which is the loss of smell or taste. This is the one symptom that predict better whether you have COVID. So about 2/3 of the people that have confirmed COVID actually have loss of smell or taste. So if you're one of those people, it's definitely time to go and see your doctor. And then in the last month, we also got endorsed by NHS Scotland and Wales that are actually encouraging the population to use the app to report their symptoms, not only for research, but also because it's a great tool for understanding the spread of the virus, so that you can prepare the hospitals better. And that's particularly relevant because we are leading indicators versus hospital admission. So the numbers of people who think have COVID would increase first in our stats, then hospital admission would start to increase too, and then sadly, a couple of weeks later, death. So we're very happy with all of that stuff. So that brings me to Zoe and React Native. So for us, the pre-COVID era, the kind of project we're doing, were on nutrition, and we had 2 apps. One was used for managing our studies, so something that study participant would use to report, to log their meals. That would be some kind of task list, so that we tell them on that day they need to do those things, because being part of a study is like a very specific protocol. And we've got a second app that is more about showing some kind of results based on the test you did. We can tell you, how good some food would be for you personally. So second app really about nutrition, food, and informing you. And those 2 apps were developed full native, one in Swift, one in Kotlin. So that's basically 4 code base. This had one big problem, which is a very low bus factor, obviously a lot of rework, but also lack of flexibility in the sense when you just have one engineer that can do the work on one platform. If you want to really push forward one on the other, or if you just want to go faster, it's not that easy. And we certainly found that getting a non-mobile engineer to learn a mobile environment with Swift or Kotlin is not like an easy task. So we actually had our Android engineer that started working on Swift to kind of speed up the development over iOS. But yeah, that definitely took him several weeks to start reaching a point where he was able to work by himself. So that led us to think about React Native, and basically we started to conduct an experiment, which was, can we rewrite our Android app with React Native? And the reason we choose our Android app is because at some point, as I said, our Android engineer switched to iOS because we wanted to go faster on iOS, because there was no point having 2 apps being exactly the same. We were basically not learning twice as much. So we've decided to bet everything on iOS just to iterate faster. So at that point, the Android version was lagging quite significantly. We decided to run that experiment with 2 developers, our Android engineers, which was loading a third platform, and another engineers that joined us a couple of weeks before that and had a bit of experience with React Native, having worked with it for a year as a sole developer. And the goal was to work for about 6 weeks and see how far we could go with rebuilding the app, and especially learn about what is easy and what is hard. So not just redo the app as is, but trying to see what would be the things that would bite us ultimately. All of that was great, and basically at that point, 3 weeks into the experiment, we've basically aborted it just because we've switched everybody to the COVID Symptom Study app. So at that point, we chose React Native because there was no way we would be able to build an iOS version, a Kotlin version of the COVID Symptom Study app in 36 hours. That was just not achievable. So, based on our experience, we were quite convinced that we could build something quite quickly with React Native that would work cross-platform. Obviously, it was like a massive bet because we just didn't have any production experience with it. But we've embraced it, and, we tried to just, take the paved road. So, use Expo with the managed workflow, TypeScript, because that's something we're using in our experiment too, and we're quite opinionated about the fact that having some static typing was something worth doing. React Native navigation, native base for components, Formic for managing forms, and a few other libraries. I think one of the key things there that we did is just we didn't try to find what was the best solution for each of those. We basically picked, the most obvious one, like, almost the first search, Google search results, because we just didn't have time, right? We just needed to move super fast. So just took whatever we're playing with for experiment, not trying to double guess, what was the best solution. What went well with this whole experience? Well, the first thing is that we shipped like super fast. As I said, in 36 hours, we had a first version. It was not great by any means, but we did have a first version of the app, and we did take a lot of shortcuts. Like the first version of the app that was published a few days later, for example, didn't have password reset. It was like something that was definitely missing and requested by a lot of people. The other thing that went very well is that when you learn about React Native, you're mostly interested by shared code base, and our experience has been yes, we've shared almost everything into code base. There's a few places where there is an if for Android and iOS, but that's very, very minimal. And that's super important because we don't have a great QA process. So, being able to have this kind of shared code base and mostly the bugs that you're going to have, they're going to eat the two is extremely useful. So we still have some rendering differences between iOS and Android, but they tend to be on the margin, not something absolutely used. And it's pretty easy for us to actually detect those and fix those. And the third thing that went very well is onboarding web developers. So literally we had 2 engineers that were familiar with React that never done any mobile engineering before. We asked them to start working the code base. 24 hours later, they were productive. And that's really amazing. And that's in the context where ourselves, the other people working on the code base were themselves not experts, right? So it's really easy for someone knowing React to switch to writing React Native. If we zoom a bit on Expo, the other thing that worked very well are over-the-air updates. That was actually one of the reasons we're also considering React Native for our kind of nutrition app. And that saved us many, many times. Notification setup was super simple. We forgot about FCM setup initially on Android, but when we found out about that took us just a couple of hours to set it up, and that was very convenient because again, Expo gives you an abstraction, and you can basically reach Android and iOS very easily through that mechanism. And we still haven't need to eject from Expo even 2 months later. So there's probably a point at which we'll need to do that, but actually Expo is covering a lot of feature, and that makes our life a lot easier. But there's also things we struggle with. So I think one of the key problem we have is that we're still not sure 2 months later what is good React Native. We basically took a lot of shortcuts. We tried to ship an app as quickly as possible, and there's definitely things we probably didn't do well. So for example, one of the debates we didn't have and now are starting to have is whether we should use hooks or not. So we started without hooks, just with class components. And we did realize after the fact that actually the whole community is moving towards Hook. So that's probably something we should start integrating in our code base. Another thing that we kind of struggle with is how to style and reuse components. So we tend to have style sheets that are recreated for every single screen. And component reuse is quite small. So again, that's definitely some best practice there that we did not follow. And the last thing is a kind of CI/CD setup. So the nice thing about over-the-air updates is that they exist and you can push an update without doing native builds, but that also makes your whole process a lot harder to set up. And it wasn't clear to us at the beginning, when we needed to do over-the-air updates versus when we needed to push new native builds. Again, if we zoom a bit on specificities of Expo, so over-the-air updates are amazing, but the defaults are not necessarily what you want. So, for example, the default is basically the update would be asynchronous on startup. But if you want to kind of strongly encourage people to use the latest version of your app, and if your app, like ours, is basically something that you use only once a day, you probably want to make it synchronous on startup, at least to some degree. So we changed that, but it took us a few weeks to really understand what was the update behavior. Credentials management for CI/CD through Expo at some point was just entirely broken, and they fixed it and have been extremely responsive, but that really slowed us down, and we just struggle as part of the automation. And as I mentioned, one of the big questions we were asking ourselves is, when do you actually need a native release? So the documentation on Expo was not entirely clear. Now we understand it a bit better, but there's also some other consideration, which is it's actually quite nice to push a new native build, because that means you're kind of guaranteed to start from the known state for people who are installing the app. Whereas if you don't force update on startup, they could still have a version from a couple of weeks ago with maybe not all the questions that you're now asking. There are definitely things we did not explore that we feel are quite important. So animations is definitely something we did not invest in, but it's pretty clear from our experience that you can have a pixel perfect UI, and we have some screens that are actually, I wouldn't say they're beautiful, but they're certainly, not your classical Android or iOS components. And everything related to native integrations is also not something that we had to do. As I said, we're still using the Expo managed workflow. So some of the things that also surprised us was that actually React Native works. Like obviously Facebook would not use it if it did not work, but we're a bit worried that at scale you would have a lot of edge cases and a lot of issues, and actually that mostly doesn't happen. So we've got 3 million devices that are using our app, and our crash rate is actually super reasonable. And I've talked to people working at Google Play, for example, to confirm how we benchmark against other apps, and it's actually quite good. So something definitely quite happy. Shared code base was always an objective, but there was always this doubt that whether you can have a lot of if-else statement, and actually there's not. And the third thing that is actually very important is none of our top issues are related to React Native. We were wondering whether we would end up in a situation where something don't work, or lots of edge cases. And actually, no. The big problem we have are our UX is not good. Some features needs improvement, or backend sometimes is not stable because we've got sudden traffic spike. Like nothing is fundamentally related to React Native. There's nothing so far that was like totally blocking. So anyway. Thank you very much for listening to our story, and we'll take Q&A. There's a few things I want to share with you before leaving, which is, hey, you can contribute to the code base. We've made it open source, so please give us a hand if you feel that's important. And we'll do our best to integrate all those pull requests, but we're still not great at managing open source project, but we're learning, so please help. And we are looking for people to help us, building that app, not just on a pro bono basis, but actually be part of Zoe and work both on this product and the nutrition product. So thank you very much. Download the app if you're not already self-reporting, because that's important. That's helping the NHS and advancing the science. Have a good day, everybody.